What if the greatest threat to the Western world wasn't a warhead, but a worldview? For decades, the Western world believed history was moving in its direction. Democracy would spread, capitalism would dominate, nations would eventually become more Western. As they developed, it was a comforting story. But it was wrong. Kishore Mahbubani, a former Singaporean diplomat and one of Asia's most respected geopolitical thinkers, says the West has been sleepwalking. In his powerful interview, he doesn't raise his voice, but his message is thunderous. China has already risen. The West just hasn't realized it yet. The fear isn't about warships or missiles. It's about a shift so fundamental that most people don't even see it happening. While the US debates TikTok bans and European governments squabble over energy policies, China is expanding its influence with precision, economically, technologically, militarily, and ideologically. But here's the twist. China is not trying to become like the West. In fact, it's building a world where it doesn't have to. Mahbubani warns that this isn't just a power shift, it's a narrative shift. And the West? It's still stuck in an old story, assuming it's the protagonist of the future. So in this video, we're going to explore why China's rise isn't just impressive, it's a wake-up call, and why the West, if it doesn't act fast, might be on the wrong side of history. This isn't fear-mongering. This is clarity. Because the question isn't whether China is rising. The real question is, why is the West pretending it's not? It started with factories, smokestacks, cheap labor. Made in China meant mass-produced, low-cost goods. But somewhere between 1990 and today, something dramatic happened. China didn't just become the world's workshop. It became a superpower in the making. In 2010, China overtook Japan to become the world's second-largest economy. But its ambitions didn't stop at GDP rankings. China launched the Belt and Road Initiative, a sweeping infrastructure strategy spanning over 140 countries. Railways in Africa, ports in Europe, highways in Central Asia, all financed and often constructed by China. What looked like development was also diplomacy, and what looked like investment was influence. Here's the twist. While Western economies moved towards services and finance, China kept building. Not just buildings and bridges, but trade routes, resource access points, and long-term strategic footholds. According to the World Bank, China has lifted over 800 million people out of poverty, the fastest economic transformation in history. Kishore Mahbubani argues that the West made a dangerous assumption, that China's economic success would require political liberalization. But the opposite happened. China kept tight political control while outperforming many Western economies in growth, infrastructure, and long-term planning. The 2008 global financial crisis shook the West's economic image. But in China, it reaffirmed their belief that their system works, that Western-style capitalism, with its financial crashes and political gridlock, is not the only path. In 2022, China surpassed the EU in global trade value, becoming the world's largest trading partner to more countries than the US. That's not just a headline. It's a tectonic shift in global alignment. And while American lawmakers argue over budgets, China launches 10-year plans. Here's a question. What happens when the world's biggest economy doesn't follow the Western playbook? Mahbubani's answer: the West has no idea, because it never thought it would happen. In the tech race of the 21st century, one country is quietly pulling ahead, and it's not who Silicon Valley expected. For decades, the West viewed itself as the global center of innovation. The internet, smartphones, software, it all began there. But in recent years, China has done more than just catch up. It's started to lead. Take 5G, for example. While many Western countries were still debating regulations and rollout, China had already blanketed its cities with high-speed networks. The company behind it, Huawei, a tech giant so advanced the US tried to ban it. not beat it. And then there's artificial intelligence. China now produces more AI-related patents than the US. Its universities and companies are publishing research that rivals, and in some areas surpasses, Western institutions. In 2017, Beijing laid out a national AI strategy, aiming to become the world leader by 2030. Critics scoffed. Today, they're quiet. Kishore Mahbubani points to this as another blind spot. The West still sees China as a copycat economy, one that imitates rather than innovates. But that view is dangerously outdated. Companies like Tencent, Alibaba, and ByteDance have built platforms, from WeChat to TikTok, that aren't just Chinese clones, but global leaders. Here's the twist. While the West relies on fragmented tech ecosystems, China's platforms are integrated. A single app in China can message friends, order food, hail a cab, book a flight, and pay rent. It's seamless, efficient, and it's what's coming next, globally. And it's not just consumer tech. China is surging ahead in quantum computing, biotech, and semiconductors. Despite US export bans, China has doubled down on self-sufficiency. Its 2025 industrial plan outlines a path to dominate key future technologies, and they're backing it with billions in state investment. The Western model of innovation depends heavily on the private sector, but China fuses state strategy with corporate action. It's a model the West doesn't understand and can't easily compete with. Mahbubani asks, what happens when China not only manufactures the world's goods, but also designs its future? Because this isn't just about faster phones or smarter apps. It's about global dominance in the technologies that will define power in the decades to come. And the West, still congratulating itself on past victories, is waking up late to a future built in Shenzhen, not San Francisco. While much of the world watched China's economic and tech rise, something else was growing. Something that speaks in steel, satellites, and submarines. China's military isn't just growing, it's transforming. In just 2 decades, China has built the world's second-largest defense budget, second only to the United States. But unlike the US, which spreads its military across hundreds of overseas bases, China has been more selective, strategic. It's focused on regional dominance first, particularly in the South China Sea, while quietly building a presence abroad. Here's what's different. China isn't mimicking the old US model of global military projection. Instead, it's building area denial capabilities, weapons and strategies designed not to invade others, but to prevent others from invading or intervening near China's borders. Think long-range missile systems, artificial island bases, stealth drones, and hypersonic glide vehicles. In 2021, China shocked US officials by testing a fractional orbital bombardment system, a space-based missile that could strike from unexpected directions. This wasn't just a flex, it was a signal. China is innovating in defense just as fast as it is in tech. Kishore Mahbubani notes a crucial point. The West still sees China as a regional military power. But this is outdated. China now has the world's largest navy by number of ships. It's expanding its nuclear arsenal, and it's modernizing its army with AI integration, cyber warfare units, and space capabilities. Why does this matter? Because for the first time in decades, US military supremacy in the Asia-Pacific is no longer guaranteed. And if conflict ever breaks out over Taiwan, the West may discover that it has underestimated China's readiness and resolve. There's also the psychological effect. As China projects strength, other nations begin to hedge, choosing neutrality or even quiet alignment over confrontation with Beijing. This shifts global power without a single shot being fired. Mahbubani's warning is clear. Power is not just about tanks and jets, it's about perception. And right now, the West's perception of China's military might is dangerously outdated. While Western diplomats repeat the same talking points in polished conference halls, China has been rewriting the rules of diplomacy, not through speeches, but through deals. It's not just that China attends global summits, it's that it now shapes them. In 2023, Beijing shocked analysts by brokering a peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran, two nations long considered bitter rivals. This wasn't just a regional breakthrough, it was a geopolitical flex, the kind of move previously reserved for Washington or Brussels. Kishore Mahbubani highlights a growing trend. While the West still sees China as a participant in the global order, China now positions itself as a designer of a new one. Through multilateral institutions like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, and its leadership in BRICS, China offers developing nations something the West doesn't: a partnership without lectures. That's the twist. Where Western aid often comes with conditions, democracy reforms, transparency requirements, or alignment with Western values, Chinese aid comes with a handshake and a loan. No political strings, just business. Many governments, tired of being scolded, find this approach refreshing. China's wolf warrior diplomacy, often aggressive and unapologetic, is not a bug. It's a feature. It signals a new era where China is no longer afraid to confront Western criticism. And surprisingly, this assertiveness hasn't alienated the global South. In many cases, it has attracted admiration. Look at the United Nations. China has increased its influence in UN agencies, often outmaneuvering Western efforts. In Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, China isn't just investing, it's listening, hosting, offering alternatives. And as more countries align with Beijing's vision, or at least hedge their bets, the West finds its own diplomatic clout fading. Mahbubani warns that this isn't about replacing the West with China. It's about rebalancing the world. And in that new balance, Western voices may carry less weight than they're used to. Because in the boardrooms of Nairobi, the ports of Colombo, and the parliaments of Central Asia, Beijing is already in the room. For decades, the Western world believed it had won the ideological war. Liberal democracy had triumphed. The market economy was the only serious model. The end of history, as some called it, was here. But China didn't buy that story. And now, it's writing its own. Kishore Mahbubani argues that one of China's greatest strengths today is ideological confidence. Unlike in the past, when China cautiously opened its doors and looked to the West for lessons, today's China is no longer on the defensive. It believes in its system, and more importantly, it sees others beginning to believe too. What is that system? It's not democracy. It's not pure authoritarianism either. It's a governance model based on performance, long-term planning, and centralized control. And here's the twist. For many developing nations, it's starting to look appealing. Why? Because Western democracies, once models of stability and vision, now often seem paralyzed by division, short election cycles, and gridlock. Meanwhile, China can plan 10, 20, even 30 years ahead and execute. Take poverty alleviation. China eradicated extreme poverty within its borders, a feat the World Bank called unprecedented. In contrast, many Western societies still wrestle with homelessness, drug epidemics, and inequality. That contrast is powerful. For some nations, it raises uncomfortable questions. Why copy a model that can't solve its own problems? Mahbubani warns that while the West assumes its values are universal, China is showing that prosperity without Western-style democracy is not only possible, it's repeatable. And that challenges the moral foundation of Western influence. This isn't just a war of ideas. It's a competition of results. And right now, many around the world are watching both sides and asking, which one actually works? The answer isn't simple. But the rise of China's ideological confidence shows one thing clearly. The Western monopoly on how to govern a nation is over. The world is not ending, but an era is. For over a century, Western nations dominated the global stage. Economically, militarily, culturally, ideologically. It was easy to assume that this dominance was natural or permanent. But Kishore Mahbubani and the reality unfolding across the globe suggests otherwise. China's rise isn't a temporary surge, it's a structural shift. And here's the truth. The West is not just facing a rival, it's facing a civilizational counterpoint. We've explored China's economic power, its technological momentum, its military evolution, its diplomatic reach, and its ideological confidence. None of these developments alone would be cause for alarm. But together, they signal a historic rebalancing of global power. One, the West is dangerously underprepared for. Mahbubani doesn't say the West must fear China. He says the West must understand China, not as a copy of the West, not as a Cold War enemy, but as a civilization with its own logic, goals, and confidence. And that understanding begins with humility. The assumption that our way is the only way no longer holds. The belief that China must change to succeed has already been proven false. And the idea that Western dominance is inevitable? That's the most dangerous illusion of all. So, should the West be scared? Not of China's rise itself, but of its own refusal to adapt. Because history doesn't pause for complacency. It rewards those who anticipate change and punishes those who deny it. The choice for the West isn't confrontation or collapse, it's clarity. Clarity about where the world is heading. Clarity about China's role in it. And most of all, clarity about the need to rethink strategy, renew diplomacy, and relearn how to compete. Not just with weapons or wealth, but with ideas. The 21st century will not be shaped by who shouts the loudest, but by who listens the best. And right now, China is listening, building, planning. The question is the West even awake?